In the shadow of a great mountain, a small town defied an empire. For decades it stood hidden, a sanctuary for the stolen and the hunted. And when Spain, with all its power and armies, came to destroy it, they could not. Instead, they sat across the table and signed its freedom into law. This is the story of Gaspar Yanga, the man who turned the wilderness into a kingdom of the free. The year is 1609. Spain rules a vast empire, stretching from the gold-laden hills of Peru to the silver mines of Mexico, and far across the seas to the Philippines. Ships sail with treasure bound for Europe, while the colonies bleed under the weight of conquest. Along the Gulf Coast of New Spain, the sugar plantations rise like prisons under the sun. Men and women from Africa, stolen from their homelands, labor until their bodies break. But beyond the cane fields where the land begins to climb, the Spanish roads fade into narrow trails, and in those mountains, the empire's reach begins to falter. No one knows the exact day Gaspar Yanga was born, only that he began life in Africa. Some say he was of royal blood, a prince from the lands of today's Gabon or Cameroon. Whether crowned or common, he was taken from his home, chained, and thrown into the dark belly of a ship. He endured the Middle Passage, survived the plantations, and then vanished into the mountains. Up there in the highlands near Pico de Orizaba, he gathered others like himself, men, women, children, people who had tasted the whip and vowed never to feel it again. To the Spanish, they were ghosts. To each other, they were family. They built their lives in the folds of the mountains, where mist curled through the trees and rivers ran swift and cold. Fields of maize and beans hid behind walls of green. Hunters brought back deer and wild pigs. Women tended gardens and told stories by the fire. Scouts watched the ridgelines, ready to send word if strangers dared approach. Every newcomer, whether from a nearby plantation or freshly arrived from Africa, brought knowledge. Which herbs could heal a wound? Which plants could poison a well? How to fight as free men, not as captives. It was more than survival. It was a living declaration. We will not return. For years, the Spanish tolerated this hidden settlement. The mountains were vast, the people within, elusive. But when Yanga's warriors began raiding the mule trains, taking sugar, silver, weapons, the empire could not ignore them. The roads that carried wealth from Veracruz to Mexico City now carried fear. In the eyes of the crown, Yanga had crossed a line, so they sent an army. The soldiers came with muskets, steel, and the backing of empire. They marched into the highlands, and the mountains swallowed them. Bridges collapsed under their weight. Mists hid enemies they could not see. Arrows flew from the trees, then silence, then another strike from the shadows. Every trail they took seemed to vanish into nothing. When they found Yanga's settlement, they burned the fields, but the Maroons rebuilt them. Days turned to weeks, weeks to months, and still the town stood. The Spanish could destroy buildings, but they could not break the will of a people who had already known the worst captivity had to offer. In the end, the empire did something it almost never did. It talked. Yanga's terms were clear. His people would stop raiding. They would live in their own town, governed by their own leaders. They would be free. In return, they would pay tribute to the crown, accept a Catholic priest, and, most bitter of all, return any new runaways who sought refuge there. It was a compromise, but one that meant the survival of the community. And so, the town of San Lorenzo de los Negros was born. It stood as one of the first legally recognized free black settlements in the Americas, not in a distant dream of freedom, but in the heart of a colonial empire built on slavery. Over the years, the town grew. It blended African traditions, indigenous customs, and Spanish structures, becoming a living symbol of resistance written into law. Across the Americas, maroon settlements rose in defiance. Queen Nanny in Jamaica, Palmares in Brazil, the Maroons of Suriname. Most fought for decades. Some were crushed. Others signed treaties. Yanga's achievement came early, over a century and a half before Haiti's revolution. His people had stood against the Spanish army and lived to see the ink dry on their freedom. Today, the city of Yanga in Veracruz bears his name. Every August, festivals fill the streets, music, dancing, reenactments of the Maroon battles. Children grow up knowing the name of the man who turned the wilderness into a shield. But for centuries, the wider world barely spoke his name. Now, his story is finally being told. Was Yanga truly a prince? History does not confirm it. But whether he wore a crown in Africa or not, he became a king in the hearts of his people. He carved out a place where children were born free, where the Spanish flag could wave, but not rule. His life reminds us that freedom is not always won in a final battle. Sometimes, it is claimed in the quiet, unyielding act of refusing to bow. Which Maroon story should we tell next? Palmares in Brazil, Queen Nanny's guerrilla resistance in Jamaica, or the black loyalists who crossed the Atlantic twice? Tell me in the comments. And if you believe these stories should never be forgotten, subscribe and keep these roots alive.